Everyone laughed when she walked into the race with a limping, half-starved horse. They whispered, pointed, even mocked her to her face. "What's she thinking?" they sneered. "That thing can't even walk straight. How's it supposed to finish a race?" But what no one knew was that behind those hollow eyes and trembling legs beat the heart of a fighter. She had nothing, no money, no family, no champion bloodlines. Just a broken horse and an unshakable belief that he was worth something. The richest man in town stood tall in the crowd, smirking, certain she'd fail. He had everything: power, pride, and a stable full of flawless stallions. Yet in the final moments of that race, it wasn't his horse the crowd remembered. It was hers. What that broken creature did on the track that day, what he proved in the face of doubt, shook the entire town. And what happened at the finish line left the man who mocked her on his knees. This is not just a story about a race. It's a story about heart, about faith, and about what happens when someone dares to believe in the impossible. Don't blink, because you're about to witness a miracle. The sun had barely risen over the dusty hills of Red Rock when Clara led the frail, scarred horse through the auction gates. She was only 16, wearing boots too big and a dress too thin, with her mother's old hat shading eyes that had seen too much. People whispered, some snickered, but none louder than Barrett Langston, the richest rancher in the county. With his silver belt buckle shining and a cigar between his teeth, he stood surrounded by his boys, laughing as he pointed at Clara's horse. "That thing ain't even worth the rope tied round its neck," he scoffed, loud enough for everyone to hear. The horse, if you could call it that, was a patchwork of old wounds and sunken skin. Its left leg dragged with every step. One eye was clouded, and its ribs pressed hard against its skin. But Clara held the reins gently, her fingers trembling but sure. She didn't look at Barrett. She didn't respond. She just kept walking to the stall marked unsold. Earlier that morning, Clara had found the creature tied behind a saloon, half-starved and shivering. The owner had spat in the dirt and said, $2 and it's yours, girl, or I shoot it. She'd given him every coin she had, money she was saving for shoes and feed. When she led the horse away, people stared. But Clara saw something in that broken animal no one else did, a fire buried deep beneath the pain. At the auction, buyers came and went. They bid on stallions, mares with shiny coats and proud posture. The crowd clapped when Langston bought another prize quarter horse, adding to his empire. But every now and then, someone's gaze would drift toward Clara sitting beside her broken companion, whispering to it like it was royalty. The laughter faded, but the judgment remained. Why'd she waste her money? One woman muttered. She'll just end up starving alongside that beast. Clara didn't flinch. She fed the horse slowly, grain by grain. She named him Dusty, not because of his condition, but because of the quiet strength of the earth, worn, trampled, yet unshakable. Each morning, she woke before sunrise. Each evening, long after the others had gone, she stayed with him, brushing his matted mane, rubbing ointment on his sores, wrapping his legs, whispering hope into his ears. She read books on healing horses. She learned how to walk him without strain, how to wrap his knees, how to strengthen a shattered body. The ranch hands at Langston's estate would lean on the fence, smirking. Maybe she's training it for heaven. One joked. She'd have better luck planting wings on it and praying for flight. Another said. Weeks passed. Dusty began to stand taller. His coat grew less dull. The limp was still there, but his eyes were fierce. Like he remembered who he once was. Like Clara's belief had stitched him back together from the inside out. When the annual Red Rock Derby was announced, no one expected Clara to sign up. It was a brutal race, 10 miles through sand, hills, and river. Only the best horses with the finest bloodlines made it across the finish line. But Clara filled the form, handed it in, and signed Dusty's name at the bottom. The clerk laughed out loud. You're joking, right? Clara didn't smile. He's not racing to win. He's racing to finish. The news spread like wildfire. Barrett Langston himself visited the stables, leaned over the fence, and looked Dusty in the eye. Girl, I don't know if you're brave or just plain stupid, he said, but that thing won't last 2 miles. Clara stared at him. We'll see. The night before the race, the stables were alive with noise. Horses were brushed to perfection. Riders prepped saddles, tested reins, double-checked gear. Clara stood alone with Dusty. No fanfare, no team. Just her and the horse no one believed in. She ran her fingers through his mane. Tomorrow's your chance, Dusty. Not to win, just to show them what they missed. You don't have to be perfect. Just finish. The next morning, the Red Rock Derby began with the crack of a rifle. Dust thundered beneath the hooves of a dozen prize stallions. Spectators lined the course. Barrett Langston sat high in the stands, watching his new stallion charge ahead. Clara and Dusty started slow, almost limping. The crowd barely noticed them. Some laughed. Others shook their heads. But Clara didn't hear any of it. She just leaned forward and whispered, "One step at a time, boy." Every hill was a mountain. Every stretch of sand threatened to steal Dusty's legs from under him. But he kept going. Slowly, relentlessly. The sun burned. Riders began to fall back. A few horses stumbled. But Dusty kept moving. Every time Clara felt him falter, she tightened her grip and said, "I believe in you." Halfway through, Langston's prized horse clipped a rock at the river crossing and stumbled hard. Langston stood from the stands, furious. His rider tried to recover, but the stallion's leg was bleeding. They were out. Dusty limped past them, head high, eyes sharp. Langston's smirk faded. By mile 7, Dusty's limp returned. Clara's eyes welled with tears, but she didn't stop him. She let him choose. And Dusty, broken, battered Dusty, took another step. Then another. The crowd began to notice. Whispers turned into silence. The girl with the horse they mocked was still in the race. At mile 8, a rider ahead lost control. His horse bucked wildly. Clara swerved, pulling Dusty aside just in time. The fall nearly threw her off, but she held tight. Dusty staggered. His leg gave out for a moment. He collapsed. A gasp shot through the crowd. Langston stood again, arms crossed. "It's over." Clara dropped to her knees beside Dusty. She placed her hand over his heart. It was racing, fast and wild, but still beating strong. "You don't have to get up," she whispered. "But if you do, they'll never forget you." Dusty's ears twitched. He groaned, pulled his legs beneath him, and rose. The crowd went silent. Clara climbed back into the saddle, tears streaming, her heart pounding. Dusty began to walk again. And in that moment, broken horse, broken girl, both rose higher than anyone believed possible. The moment Dusty stood again, the world around them felt different. The laughter, the doubts, the whispers, they faded into silence. Clara gripped the reins, her fingers raw, her arms trembling. Dusty's legs shook beneath him, but his eyes burned like wildfire. The crowd had stopped cheering for the others. All eyes were now on the girl with the broken horse who refused to stay down. The announcer's voice, once booming with pride for the leading riders, cracked with emotion. "And she's still in it, folks. Clara and that broken horse of hers, they're still racing." Somewhere in the stands, Barrett Langston clenched his jaw. His rider was out. His prized horse was injured and limping out of the competition. But the horse he called useless, the girl he laughed at, they were still moving forward. Clara pressed gently into Dusty's side. He started walking again, his hooves dragging through dirt and pain, but never stopping. Step by step, he crossed mile 9. Then came the hardest part of the course, the final stretch. A steep climb followed by a long downhill curve, leading straight to the finish line. Other riders were far ahead. The crowd had already begun to shift their attention back to the leaders. But not everyone. Some stood in stunned silence, watching Clara and Dusty with tears in their eyes. An old rancher removed his hat. A little boy on the fence whispered, "Come on, Dusty, you can do it." The hill rose like a mountain in front of them. Dusty hesitated, panting hard. Clara leaned forward and whispered, "One more hill, boy. One more, and they'll never laugh again." With every ounce of strength left in his fragile frame, Dusty took the incline. The crowd held its breath. Each step felt like it could be his last. But Clara didn't beg him. She didn't whip or pull. She believed. She trusted. And Dusty responded, not like a dying creature, but like a warrior fighting his final battle. Tears ran down Clara's face as they reached the top. Behind her, The valley stretched wide, the trail they'd conquered long and brutal. Ahead, the track dipped into a gentle curve where the finish line waited. And suddenly, a strange wind swept over them. The sun broke through a passing cloud, and Dusty, limping, shaking, panting, began to run. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't fast. But it was real. Each stride grew stronger, each breath louder. The crowd saw it. They rose to their feet. Gasps filled the air. A wave of energy passed through the stands like a storm. For the first time, Clara wasn't just the girl with a broken horse. She was the heart of the race. Barrett Langston stood motionless, his hat in his hand now, his face pale, his eyes locked on the impossible. Dusty charged the final curve. His body trembled, but his legs held. The finish line glistened in the distance like a promise. And then it happened. The rider in second place had lost control during the downhill turn. His stallion reared up, startled by the sudden cheers for Dusty. The horse stumbled, sliding sideways into the trail. The path narrowed, the finish line now blocked. Clara had seconds to react. She could stop. She could swerve and risk falling. But Dusty, broken Dusty, angled his body and leaped. It wasn't a clean jump. It wasn't smooth. But it was enough. Enough to clear the edge. Enough to land beside the fallen rider. Enough to keep going. The crowd erupted. Gasps turned to cheers. Disbelief turned to awe. People jumped to their feet, screaming her name, screaming his. Clara could barely see through her tears. Just a few more steps, Dusty, she whispered, barely breathing. And step by step, hoof by hoof, they crossed the finish line. Not first, not even second, but standing, alive, together. As they passed under the final banner, Clara collapsed forward, wrapping her arms around Dusty's neck. He stopped. He breathed heavy. He didn't fall. The crowd stormed the field. Reporters shoved forward. Judges blinked in disbelief. But Clara didn't look at any of them. She just held Dusty close, sobbing into his mane. Someone in the crowd began to clap. Then another. Then dozens more. Until the entire stadium thundered with applause. People weren't cheering the winners. They were cheering the miracle. And Barrett Langston, the man who once mocked her, who laughed at her broken horse, who said she was foolish and blind, he stepped forward from the shadows of the stands. He walked through the crowd, silent, watching Clara standing with the horse he once called worthless. He stopped a few feet from them, his boots sinking into the dust. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, he took off his hat, looked Dusty in the eye, and dropped to his knees. He didn't fall from shame or guilt. He fell because the weight of what he had seen crushed every arrogant word he'd ever spoken. He had spent his life chasing perfection, breeding speed, buying beauty. But here, before him, stood something no money could buy. Clara looked at him, not with hate, not with pride, but with quiet dignity. "I didn't race to prove you wrong," she said. "I raced to prove Dusty right." Langston lowered his head, his voice barely a whisper. "You did." Photographs were taken. Newspapers across the state ran headlines like, "Broken Horse Becomes Legend." She believed, and he rose. The race that changed Red Rock forever. But for Clara, it wasn't about fame. It wasn't about making Langston fall. It was about one horse, one soul who had been left to rot and forgotten, who had every reason to give up, but didn't. That night, Clara slept in the stables beside Dusty. The medal they gave her hung loosely from the gate. She didn't care for it. All she cared for was the soft sound of Dusty's breathing, steady and strong, as he rested like a king in the straw. She had walked into the race with nothing but a broken horse and hope. And she walked out with something even the richest man in town didn't have: respect, love, and a story no one would ever forget. Weeks passed since the race, but the memory never faded. People still talked about the broken horse who ran with more heart than any champion. Children in the town pretended to ride Dusty in the fields. Old cowboys nodded with respect whenever Clara passed by. Her name was no longer whispered with pity, but with reverence. Barrett Langston, once the proudest man in Red Rock, changed in quiet ways. He never spoke about the day he dropped to his knees. But those who worked for him noticed he walked slower, listened more. One morning, he visited Clara's ranch, not with arrogance but humility. In his hand, He held a small leather bag. "This belonged to my father," he said. "He gave it to me after my first win. I want you to have it." Clara looked at the bag, then at Dusty grazing peacefully under the sun. "Why?" "Because I've bred 100 strong horses," Langston said, voice low. "But I've never raised one with a heart like his." Clara accepted the gift, not for its value, but for what it meant, proof that Dusty had changed more than just a race. He had changed a man's soul. That winter, Dusty's health declined. The vet said it was his time. His heart had given everything it had, and it was fading. Clara sat beside him in the cold barn, her hand on his neck, her voice trembling as she whispered stories of that race, how he made the world believe again. Dusty passed on a quiet morning, his eyes soft, his breath warm until the end. Clara buried him on the hill overlooking the racetrack. She carved a stone with her own hands. "Here lies Dusty, the horse who ran with nothing left, but everything to give." People came from towns away to see it. Flowers were laid. Children left drawings. Even Barrett Langston stood at the grave, hat pressed to his chest, eyes full of regret and respect. Years later, when Clara was older, she told the story to her own children. They would sit wide-eyed by the fireplace, listening to how a girl no one believed in, and a horse everyone gave up on, crossed the finish line of life with courage no one could measure. She always ended with the same words. "Strength isn't what others see. It's what you carry when no one's looking." Dusty carried me, and I carried him. That's what love does. In the quiet hills of Red Rock, where the wind still whispers through the stables, people remember the girl and her broken horse, not for how fast they ran, but for how deeply they touched every heart that watched. And somewhere, in every soul that's ever been mocked, broken, or left behind, the story of Dusty lives on.